let's do a sound check. Can everyone hear me okay? I do have a microphone at my disposal, so if anyone has trouble hearing, just raise a hand at any point, let me know. As Bonnie said, I am a policy analyst with Ramsey County in the Policy and Planning Division, which is located in the County Manager's Office. And I'm also a part-time instructor of political science at Metro State University. I'm actually coming back to policy work after several years in academia teaching political science and international relations. So speaking in front of groups is, not too difficult for me. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. I just started working on the census about six months ago. And I have to say, I had no idea it was going to be this exciting when I first started working on it, but as many of you know, it has become much more sort of controversial and politicized than censuses normally are, which makes it fun and exciting and rewarding to work on, but it also raises the stakes tremendously for all of us. And we're going to talk a little bit more tonight about why the stakes are so high and what we can do about it. So just to begin, does anyone have any questions for me so far? Okay, so I'll begin. Okay, so the basics about the census. I'm sure most of you have responded to the census before, maybe a few of you have not. But generally, as you may know, the Constitution itself requires a decennial census for representation. It's in the Constitution. It's the same clause that has the 3/5 compromise in it requires a decennial count of all free persons, excluding Indians not taxed, and counting only 3/5 of all other not free persons. Those two conditions no longer apply, of course. So now the requirement is to count all free persons. Note the use of the word persons, not citizens, right? So that's in the Constitution. From 1970 to 2000, as you may remember, we had a short form and a long form, right? The short form was about 10 questions, and that went to everybody. The long form went to a sample of the population, and that was the really long one that asked you like how many TVs you have and that sort of thing. So they stopped doing that in 2000. So now what goes out every 10 years is a short form, and then throughout the interim, the other years, not just every 10 years, there's something called the American Community Survey, which is an interview-based survey, which is essentially, the long form, and that is done with just a sample of the population. So maybe in a couple of years, or 5 or 7 years from now, someone will come to your door and ask you to participate in the American Community Survey, and that's essentially the long form. Okay. In 2010, there were only 10 questions, probably about the same length, with the possible addition of 1 or 2 more questions in 2020. As you know, there probably will be a question on citizenship, which we'll get to. And I'm not really sure because I haven't seen, I don't think the general public has seen the form yet for 2020, but there may be also a question asking people about your ancestral origins. So it's no longer going to be sufficient to just say you're white or whatever. You would also add a little bit more information in a blank about white from where? White from Syria, white from Norway, like what does white mean? So that may be on the 2020 census as well. Any other questions?
Yeah. That other survey, the one that's like the long form, will that one be available years from now for ancestry research or not?
Do you mean the data that they collect?
Yes.
Yes, all of that data is available online right now. You can go to the Census website and have access to a wealth of data from past American community surveys. And in fact, that's the survey, that's the data that we now have that tells us that, for example, 15% of Ramsey County residents are foreign born. We already know that from the American Community Survey. We also have a rough ethnic breakdown of Ramsey County residents because of the American Community Survey. So yes, all of that data is publicly available in aggregated form.
And I actually didn't mean in aggregate, I meant individually, like
No.
when you go to the History Center now, you can, after so many decades, you can get
Right,
to your
so like
own
for
ancestry.
genealogical research?
Yeah,
No.
that won't be there, okay.
No, and in fact, individual level, personal level data is secret. It's highly guarded, and it must remain secret for 72 years. So,
Basically a lifetime.
yeah. So, and after that, I don't know on what conditions they would release personal level data. But that is, it's supposed to be secret. And we'll come back to that very question because of the citizenship question. Has a lot of people concerned about the secrecy of their data.
Do you know approximately how many long forms or these American surveys are sent out or completed?
That's a good question. I won't even hazard a guess. But probably each round of surveys would be at least 50,000 people, I would think. So,
Okay,
It's
it's
a
not like
sample.
10%, it's just the real.
no, it's just a sample. Yeah. Okay. So this is probably familiar to you. This is generally what the census looks like. This is from the 2010 census. You probably can't see this right now, but you may remember that in 2010, they asked, for example, whether a person was of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. And like I said, they may be expanding this kind of question about ethnic origins in the next one. But, very, very basic. The most important, what I've heard, the questions that are considered to be most essential to be answered are the number of people living in the home, the gender, and the age. And from what I've heard is if you answer just those 3 questions, the rest are sort of optional. But I'm not sure if I'm even legally like allowed to say that. I don't really know. But generally, it's my understanding that the 3 most essential questions are the number of people, their ages, and their gender. So we'll come back to that too when we talk about the citizenship question. Okay, so the general timeline for the 2020 census. I know 2020 seems really far away, but from a planning perspective, it's not that far at all. In fact, we are already deep into planning for the 2020 census. In April of this year, we concluded what's known as the Local Update of Census Addresses program, LUCA. That's a program that involves the counties, municipalities, and other local governments in cooperation with the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau sends counties, municipalities, under lock and key, the data that they have on addresses, right, where all the addresses are, and then the cities and counties work to verify those addresses. And sometimes they can do that just with their own maps and records. Sometimes they actually have to like drive out to look at buildings and make sure that the addresses are correct. So they may have an address like, oh, here's a building that appears to have a 20A and a 20B. We're not sure about 20C. Can you go check on that? So someone has to check and see if there's a 20C, in terms of house numbers. So that concluded. Ramsey County participated. We verified all of our addresses. And also in 2018, local level organizing began in the metro region area. So I and my counterparts in Minneapolis, Hennepin, City of St. Paul, and other municipalities and local governments have started coordinating with each other on our planning. What are you doing? And this is what we're doing. And just so we're all generally on the same page and trading information. We're going to soon start coordinating our communications messaging and that sort of thing. So we're already, into the planning and coordination process. In January 2019, the Census Bureau's own communications campaign will begin, and they're just finalizing their campaign plan now. March 2020. So this is going to be the first census in which there is an online response option, right? I know it's like
Oh, boy.
maybe a decade or two late, but you know, and this is a good thing because it means that the more people that respond online is, you know, it saves costs in the long run. The more people that respond online or with a postcard, or sorry, the more people that respond online or with the paper questionnaire, the fewer enumerators the Census Bureau has to send out. So in March of 2020, they're going to send out the first round of postcards saying, hey, it's time for the census. Here's a link. You can go online and put in this code and you can answer online, right? And then there's going to be, I think, a second round of postcards saying, hey, we didn't get your response online. A questionnaire is going to come out. You can do that too. Don't worry, you don't have to go online. A questionnaire is coming. And then the questionnaires will go out. So maybe people who like don't want to go online or can't go online or whatever, they have the option of filling in the paper questionnaire and sending that in. Then there's April 1st, 2020 Census Day. It's not really a deadline of any kind, but in April, that's when the enumerators start going out to follow up with households that have not self-responded. Right? So if you don't go online and fill out your questionnaire, if you don't write out the questionnaire and send it in, someone will come to your house and try to track you down and get you to answer. Even with all of these efforts, there are typically, maybe in Minnesota, Ramsey County, up to 20% of the population that does not respond. Right? Yes?
Is there adequate funding to have enumerators in Minnesota?
That's a really good question because this year it's going to probably be even more challenging than in the past, and they're going to have to hire a lot more enumerators to track down all the people who may not want to respond for a variety of reasons. And it's going to be difficult to hire enumerators because now we're already at nearly full employment, especially in the metro area. So getting people to take a part-time job with the census for substandard wages is going to be really difficult. In Ramsey County, the Census Bureau is paying $16.50 an hour, which is not bad, but it's, I mean, from what I understand, you can make about that much working at the Super America. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, from what I understand, the Census Bureau already knows that it has to hire about 500,000 enumerators for this census, and that's not going to be easy. It's going to be expensive.
It's a good job for retirees.
It's a great job for
Yeah,
retirees.
my husband did it twice, yeah.
It's a great job for students. It's a great job for anyone who wants a side hustle, right? Anyone who wants a little extra cash. It's like, what, 10 weeks of work? Ideally, they want people to work their own neighborhoods because the communication is better if you're talking to people who are your own neighbors. The problem is that, in a lot of the census tracts where they need the most people because response rates are lowest, it's hardest to hire people from those areas. So we'll talk about that too. Okay, so the census is about 3 really important things: power, money, and data. Right? Talk about each one. Power. The census is all about your political representation. Now, if you ever thought, or if you ever wondered, like, how do they know, like, how many people go in a district, or how do they determine districts, how do they draw the boundaries, how do they decide how many Congress people we get, it's all based on census data. There's no other way for them to know, how to apportion districts, okay? So the allocation of legislative seats, that's, first of all, the number of legislative seats, as you probably know, is fixed, right? At how many? 435, right? As we know, our population all around the country is going up. It's going up much faster in some places than in others. But the number of seats is fixed at 435. So that means that every 10 years when there's a census, they have to reallocate those seats and redraw boundaries. Some people are going to lose seats, and some states are going to lose seats, and some states are going to gain seats. Right? This also means that boundaries change. There's redistricting that happens, right? And that can be very difficult, very political as well, as you know. And it affects our electoral votes. So electoral votes are based on what? The number of congressional seats and the number of Senate seats, right? Added together. So what does this mean for Minnesota? This is what the congressional reapportionment looked like in 2010. Now, as some of you may remember from 10 years ago, Minnesota was this close to losing a congressional seat, right? We have 8. We almost lost that one. In fact, we got the 435th seat. And we got it only by a count of 10,000 people. Now, 10,000 people is not very much, especially when you consider only 82% of people even responded to the census, which is a good rate when you compare us with other states across the country. A lot of other states have lower response rates than 82%. But, you know, lose 1 or 2% and that's like 10,000 people, right? So response rates are really important. We know that the people are there. We have the number of people to keep that 8th seat. The issue is counting them, getting them to respond to the census. So we're going to be in the same position in 2020, because we barely kept our seat in 2010. You can see that the states that gained seats are the ones that are growing really fast, like Texas and Florida. Minnesota's growing too, but we're not growing as fast as Texas and Florida. The states that have lost seats, Iowa, Missouri, Louisiana, Michigan, Ohio. You can see there's sort of a Rust Belt theme here. Like a lot of the states in the so-called Rust Belt lost seats, right? So we're going to be in the same position next time in 2020. This is very tiny print, I'm sorry. But I can tell you that the states that are projected to gain seats in 2020 are Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Montana, North Carolina, Oregon, and Texas. The states that are projected to lose seats: Alabama, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and West Virginia. And here on Minnesota it says, you know, 7 or 8. Like, we're still not really sure if we're going to keep it. Now, if we lose a seat, of course, that means we lose an electoral vote. We lose weight in the national political decision-making process. The stakes are pretty high for us. Any questions about me? Okay, so what would that mean for our congressional districts? So if we stay at 8 seats, right, we'll keep these 8 districts, but the lines will change a bit because of where population is growing and where population is shrinking. So very likely, you know, we will gain people in the metro area and lose people in greater Minnesota because the population there is declining. So that means that these big districts in greater Minnesota will become even bigger, sort of less dense and bigger, whereas the, you know, like the 5th congressional district in the central, you know, city, the Twin Cities, that will just contract. Like the district will physically become smaller because there are more people. It will become denser and smaller, right? If we lose a seat, then all of these districts will have to become bigger, right? Which means that each congressperson will be representing more people, which is, you know, I mean, if they're doing a good job and like listening to all their constituents and holding meetings and being responsive, it's just more work. It's a lot more work for them to have to represent that many more people.
Yes, I mean, you're talking about, you mentioned before that indigenous people are now counted, correct?
Yeah.
And,
Well, they're supposed to be counted.
supposed to be counted. What about people who are homeless that live in the metro area?
So that's a really good question. the Census Bureau does actually send sort of a forward team of people into like enumerators, a forward team of enumerators before they even send out like the postcards. I think they begin in January or February. They start going out and counting people who live in so-called group quarters, which includes prisons, dormitories, nursing homes, and they also have people like actually like walking the streets looking for people who don't have addresses, who don't have like a home. And so there's some effort to track those people down, but obviously they're gonna miss people. Of course they'll miss people. Partly because people are transient, they're moving around, you can't catch up with them all the time. And partly because a lot of those people may not trust someone from the government who's chasing after them with a form saying, hey, let me just ask you a few questions here. You know what I mean? So homeless people do get undercounted, for sure. Another level of representation that's based on census data is our state legislative districts. Those will also be reapportioned with borders redrawn, and you may see the phenomenon where the greater Minnesota districts are expanding, becoming less dense, and the metro area districts are becoming more dense and smaller. This will, of course, also be, a very sort of political process. It's a very difficult process. No representative particularly likes to, lose constituents or have to reestablish new relationships in new areas, but that's usually what has to happen every 10 years. Okay, so that was power. The next big thing is money. Right? The census is also all about money. It's really important. Census data is the basis for the distribution of federal funds to states for some really critical programs that many of us depend on. Right? In terms of the number of dollars, it's about $600 billion distributed to state and local governments each year in federal funds. Minnesota alone gets about $1,532 per person per year in federal funds for these programs. Now, keep in mind that whatever count we get in 2020, the number of people that were, supposedly counted at, that's going to stay the same until 2030. So if we undercount people in 2020, we're kind of stuck with that number through 2030. Which means that for every person we miss, we're missing $15,320 for the whole 10-year period for each person. So undercounting people can have huge ramifications for these kinds of programs. Medicaid, right? Highway planning and construction, SNAP, Section 8. All of these funds are distributed on the basis of census counts. So in 2020, when you think about, say, the citizenship question, or you think about people's fear for the security of their data, or the rampant mistrust in government, and the impact that this could have on response rates, this is going to have an enormous impact on the money that we get from the federal government for these essential programs. This is why our efforts to try to get people to respond to the census is so crucial. And it's not just federal funds allocated to states. Minnesota's state government also uses census data to allocate state funds to local governments, right? There's local government aid, LGA for example. And Ramsey County got $71 million in 2018 in LGA. St. Paul alone got $65 million of that, right? That's a lot of money, the stakes are pretty high. There's also community education funding, small cities development grants, and the Trunk Highway Fund. All of this is based on census data. Finally, there's data, right? So, as you know, data is really important. What a lot of people don't know is the census is really the source of all kinds of data that we use for everything. Academics use census data, policymakers use census data, business people and real estate developers use census data. Everybody uses census data. Like there is no other source for that data, right? So we plan for infrastructure developments, we plan for public services, we plan, business people make their investment decisions, real estate decisions, all based on census data. And without it, you're really flying blind, right? Everything's a guessing game. Maps for emergency services, that's based on census data, right? Real estate development, business marketing research. If we don't know how many people we have living where and which areas are growing quickly and which areas are growing slowly, we don't really know how to deal with this stuff. So this, I don't know if you can read this tiny white print, but this graphic sort of illustrates the environment of the 2020 census, all the different factors that are affecting what kind of count we can expect to get, right? A mobile population, people are constantly moving around, right? Especially millennials, college students, low-income households, they're moving around all the time. It can be very difficult to count those people. Informal complex living arrangements, an increasingly diverse population, declining response rates in general. For the last several decades, we've seen, for whatever reason, just a slowly, steadily declining response rate generally. And we also have increasing distrust in government. Even without the citizenship question, people are more and more are like, why is the government asking me for my personal information? Do I really want to tell them, how many children I have, what their names are and their ages are, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, why do they need to know this? But on the other hand, we also have this tremendous, what's called here an information explosion, which means, the added technology that we have to respond to the census, in some sense mitigates some of the difficulty because now it's a little bit easier and cheaper for people to respond, so hopefully that will make it a little bit better. And up there, it says constrained fiscal environment. And that is one of the challenges that I'm going to be talking about. As difficult as we anticipate the 2020 census to be, we're not getting that much more money to deal with it. So that's going to be a problem. We don't anticipate that the amount of money that the president has requested for the 2020 census is going to be adequate. It's projected to cost a lot more, and that was before the citizenship question was announced to be added, which is going to raise costs even further. So, what are some more challenges that we have to keep in mind? Well, as Bonnie mentioned, as you may know, consistently, every decade, with every census, there are certain populations, certain demographic groups that are disproportionately undercounted. We know generally who they are. It doesn't really change from census to census. People of color are consistently undercounted. People in low-income households for a variety of reasons, partly because those households often move around a lot. Sometimes it's because of lower education levels. Sometimes it's because lower income households are disproportionately people of color. For a whole variety, complex of reasons, low-income households are undercounted on the census. People with limited English are often undercounted on the census. Maybe because they don't really understand what the census is, and they don't know why this person keeps knocking on their door, what are these postcards? If you don't understand what's going on, it's much easier to just sort of avoid it and opt out. Immigrants and refugees, some of the same reasons, and maybe also just general fear, especially if people are coming from places where the government knocking on your door was just bad news. Like, you may not want to participate in the census. Renters, because they tend to move around a little bit more often. Students, same reason. I think students also tend to just be younger and not really understand what the census is about or why it's important, and it's just like one more hassle on top of like X number of midterms and papers to write, and you know, like who wants to deal with it? So they tend to be undercounted as well. Now, those are the regular challenges that we have to deal with from year to year. In 2020, we have the citizenship question as well, which totally throws a wrench into the works, right? So Ramsey County is going to be particularly impacted by all of these various challenges that typically are involved with the census. For one thing, it has large proportions of people who are consistently undercounted, who tend to be undercounted. And those proportions are just getting bigger. Ramsey County is becoming ever more diverse. It's got about 40% people of color, over 30% people of color. 40% of households in Ramsey County are renters, right? 14% of households, depending on how you define poverty, but about 14% of households in Ramsey County are living in poverty. And then in terms of the foreign-born populations, 19% of residents in St. Paul were born in another country. In Ramsey County, about 15% of residents were born in another country. About half of those are citizens and half of those are not citizens. But with regard to the citizenship question, it's not so simple that, you know, oh, well, if you're a citizen, you're not going to have a problem with the question. It's not that easy. I wanted to show you one thing here. So where it's light gray there, that's a link. It says expected low response rates. And I want to show you this really cool thing. If you like going online and playing with maps as much as I do, the Census Bureau has this really cool interactive tool called ROAM, R-O-A-M. And, oh, it's not showing on here. Oops. Okay, so I am going to simply show a static picture of it. So this is what it looks like. And when you go onto this website, you can actually click on each one of these little blocks. Each one of those blocks is a census tract. And as you can see, there are a lot of dark blue ones centered around, you know, St. Paul, a couple of turquoise ones in Roseville. And the darker the color, the lower the expected response rate. And they base this estimate on past response rates and also the demographics of that census tract, which can change since, you know, 2010. You know, a lot of these census tracts are becoming more diverse than they were before, so potentially the self-response rate could be even lower in 2020. But if you click on one of those census tracts, you get this awesome little window that opens up, and it gives you a detailed demographic breakdown of that census tract, pointing out all the reasons, showing you all the reasons why that census tract's response rate could be very low. And in St. Paul, these dark blue ones, we're talking a self-response rate as low as 60%, 70%, which means 30 to 40% of people are not going to be counted, potentially, in those census tracts, which is a lot of people. The two turquoise census tracts in Roseville, I think that's like 75% response rate, so 25% non-response rate. So that's just a static picture, but I highly recommend this website. It's called ROAM. Just Google census.gov and ROAM, or census and ROAM, and you'll be able to play with that. So back to the funding challenge. Low response rates are a problem because it means that the Census Bureau has to hire more enumerators to go out and chase people down, knocking on their doors, which is expensive, right? It costs more to do outreach. The Census Bureau is going to have to spend more money on forming local partnerships with local organizations who can put out the message and try to encourage people to respond. It's going to spend more money on communications, all aspects of field operations. Everything's going to cost more money whenever response rates are down, right? And as I said, the administration's funding request that they've made thus far is likely inadequate. And this was already considered inadequate before they added the citizenship question. With the citizenship question, the Census Bureau itself expects the cost of the census to go up by $91 million.
Do you know what percentage increase that is?
So I believe that the administration's request was like 390 million. So the estimate is that they probably need like 420, 440 million, and then possibly even this additional 91 on top of that. So they're already like, they don't have enough money like just coming out of the gate. The other thing is that because of the delay in the appropriations bill last time, they didn't have the money when they needed the money, so they weren't able to start hiring people as quickly as they needed to. They weren't able to start doing all the other preparation that they needed to. So now they're catching up, and everything's just sort of behind schedule, underfunded. It's a mess.
So who actually hires the enumerators?
The Census Bureau does. If you go to Census, I think it's called censusjobs.gov. And I have a link on here, but I'm not sure that
It's nothing that the county has to do.
No. What the county is probably going to do is establish partnerships with local organizations that can encourage people to respond to the census when the census takers do come. So, you know, county workers aren't going to be out there with the questionnaires, but we can be out there saying, hey, census takers are going to come to your door in the next, few weeks. You really do want to respond. It's okay, right? That's the county's role at this point. Okay, so, I'm sorry.
So along with the county's role to do that, we're obviously you'll be targeting the neighborhoods where there's low turnout, and then maybe getting people from the community who speak the language to also.
Absolutely, yeah. We are setting up what's known as a complete count committee, and I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. Okay, so a little bit deeper into the citizenship question. As you may remember, in March 2018, the administration announced that it was adding this question to the census. And in terms of census planning, it was at the very last minute, literally just a couple of days before the final deadline took place on submitting questions. Which means that because it was added so late, it was not part of the testing that is supposed to happen with survey questions. So they had already completed some testing. They did carry out a test in Rhode Island after that, but the citizenship question wasn't on the test survey. So, technically we don't know what the impact of the citizenship question will have on response rates. However, we do know that in 2017, before the citizenship question was added to the census, American Community Survey researchers were already having trouble getting people to respond to the citizenship question on their surveys. So remember I mentioned on the ACS, the American Community Survey, the citizenship question has long been on the survey. It wasn't until 2017, with all of the political drama surrounding immigration and the ramping up of bigotry and anti-immigration sentiment and all of that, it wasn't until that happened that the ACS researchers really started to notice an impact on how people were reacting to that question. So they published their own study and delivered a presentation in the Census Bureau on what was happening with these American community surveys. And if you read the study, it's remarkable because the researchers are saying, you know, hey, people are acting really strangely. Like in the middle of an interview, they'll say, oh, excuse me, I'll be right back. And they leave and they never come back. Or they just, you know, like get really uncomfortable and they don't really want to answer the question. Or, you know, you can see people sort of evading or, you know, getting really concerned. So that was just with the American Community Survey, and it was bad enough with that. You know, that's sad because it impacts the data that we get, but it doesn't impact representation. It doesn't impact federal funds. So, you know, you can sort of, you know, brush it off if that's happening with the ACS. But if that's going to happen with the census itself, which does determine representation and federal funding, that's a real problem. So we already know that this will likely have an impact on response rates. Now, Congress does have the authority to remove the question. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering why they, because it was so last minute, why did they decide to add it in the first place?
Like, great question.
Why?
So this is actually the subject of several lawsuits right now. The first lawsuit is in its second week now in Manhattan District Court. And that's the question. It's like, why did you decide to answer this, or to add this question? And the Census Bureau, or rather the Department of Commerce under Wilbur Ross, claimed that the Justice Department requested to have the question added so that it has the data it needs to enforce the Voting Rights Act. Now, A, we already have the data from the ACS. B, that's not actually what happened. No, I mean, there is now email evidence that Wilbur Ross asked someone in the Justice Department to ask the Commerce Department to add the question. Right? And you're like, well, why would Wilbur Ross want this? Well, let's go back to the three things that the census is about. The first one is about power and representation. And the idea is that, now, I'm speaking, you know, based on what I've read, not as a representative of Ramsey County, but the people who were involved in demanding, asking that the citizenship question be added were Steve Bannon and who's the guy? Chris Kobach. They were the ones who were pushing the addition of the citizenship question. The lawsuits contend that it was done specifically with the intent to depress participation rates among people who are immigrants, whether they're citizens or not citizens, whether they're, you know, documented, undocumented. It almost doesn't matter, because, you know, if you are even a legal documented, you know, citizen, but you were born in another country, you may be living in a household with several members of your family who are not citizens, maybe even not documented, not here legally. And so you may decline to participate as a household simply because you don't want to sell out grandma, right? So there is the contention in these lawsuits that it was done, that it was motivated by anti-immigrant animus. It's upon the plaintiffs to make that case, to prove it.
So as I read it up there, Congress has the authority to cut through all this and remove the question. So is that possible? We're going to have a new Congress very soon.
We'll have a new House.
Is it true? Oh, it has to be everybody.
It would have to be signed by the president. It would have to be, but it would, yeah, a legislative solution to, a legislative effort to remove this question would come in the form of legislation that would have to be approved by the Senate and the President. So, not super likely. But, I mean, the House of Representatives, Congress, does have the authority to hold hearings, to try to find out, why this question was added, to shed light on it. Congress also has the ability to request from the Commerce Department whether the question is mandatory, right? If it's not mandatory, there are other options then, right? So, I mean, Congress can it can play a variety of roles, and at this point, it's most likely, the most that could be done would, the House could play an obstruction role and also, try to shed some light on what the purpose of this is through hearings and so on. Yeah, I mean, it would just be sort of an FYI, but it wouldn't really change what's on the questionnaire.
What are the restrictions on, say, ICE being able to access that data, that information?
So that's a really good question. The data that the Census Bureau collects is absolutely private. No one but the Census Bureau may access that data. ICE cannot access it, Department of Homeland Security cannot access it, no court of law can access it, the President of the United States cannot access it. The Census Bureau has a really strong culture of security. So when anyone goes in there, for example, they have to leave their cell phones behind. Like, the people who work for the Census Bureau are they take their commitment to security very, very seriously. Individually, they are sworn to secrecy for life, and if they divulge any information that they find that they see on a census form, they can go to jail for 5 years and be levied with a $250,000 fine. So they're very, very careful about this. So the problem, I think, is not so much the real risk of ICE getting the information, it's more people's perception that ICE can get the information. And I don't blame people for not trusting, what we tell them about that, especially when you say, well, I mean, it could be changed with an act of Congress, right? Congress could just simply change these rules. Try to persuade someone whose, family members are not citizens that they should just sort of go along and trust that that's not going to happen. So it's very tricky. But generally, data is very safe, right? There are additional measures being taken to ensure cybersecurity and protect the Bureau's servers from hacking. There are lots of elaborate plans in progress for that. So there's technology protecting your answers, there's these highly motivated employees protecting your answers, the law is protecting your answers, but I think the real challenge is trying to persuade people that all of this is real and that their data is safe. I think in today's climate, it's very difficult to do that. Sorry. Okay. So, a couple of you have asked, so what is Ramsey County doing about this? We've been doing a lot, okay? First of all, Ramsey County and St. Paul jointly have established a complete count committee. The complete count committee it's a type of committee, it's a body that local governments and community organizations can establish. The League of Women Voters could establish a complete count committee. Your neighborhood council could establish a complete count committee. We, Ramsey County, have partnered with St. Paul to establish a complete count committee, which will be, we're in the process of ramping it up right now, a collaboration of local government people, community groups, and ordinary citizens who will work with the community to build trust in the census, to raise awareness, and to encourage people to participate. And we're looking at a whole variety of ways in which we're going to do that. Anyone can get involved, but it's going to require a sustained commitment from now until mid-2020 and some work. It's a volunteer effort. So if you want to get involved, you can certainly contact me. I'll give you all my contact information. Another thing.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I notice this all the time with Ramsey County, but I'll just ask it about this one thing. Why is it always the county and the city, and the city is St. Paul, but you know, the entering suburbs are more like St. Paul used to be 30 years ago than anything else, but yet we never include the suburbs with the county.
That's a good question. Now, when I say that we jointly established it, that doesn't mean that other municipalities aren't involved as members. They are. The chair positions, the co-chair positions are occupied by a Ramsey County Commissioner, Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt, and a St. Paul City Council member, Mitra Nelson. And the reason that St. Paul is a co-chair is, if we go back to this map, where you can see the low response rates, the really low response rates are all in St. Paul. And yes, of course, like there are some anticipated response rate challenges in other parts of Ramsey County. So we do have people from Venice Heights, we do have people from Little Canada. We are trying to get people from Roseville and Maplewood and a lot of the other municipalities. We want them all involved. I think that at this point, so far, it's been a little bit difficult to convey the urgency because we're so far out. People think, well, I don't have to worry about the 2020 census now. But we are reaching out to everyone from throughout the county, anyone who has a stake in this, anyone who has the means to help us organize people. We want them to be involved. It's an all-inclusive effort. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the biggest challenge is in St. Paul, frankly.
Well, the committees then, this is a purely voluntary kind of activity on the part of county and city government. This is just something that Ramsey County and St. Paul and others have elected to do on their own. Is it being done in other places?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Minneapolis is establishing a complete count committee. Hennepin County, they have separate ones, so they didn't do a partnership like we did. We actually feel very proud of ourselves for doing a partnership. But Hennepin County goes way, way west of Minneapolis, so they decided that they needed their own complete count committee. I'm not sure if any other complete count committees have yet been established in the other municipalities and counties. Right now, the complete count committees are really just getting started. So I don't even have a sense of what's being done in like Scott County or Washington County or some of the other places. I expect that I will find out when we all get together for a meeting in December. But yeah, the State Demographer's Office, the Minnesota State Demographer's Office, is really pushing the complete count committees. They want them to be like established all over the state. And like I said, anyone could start one. Legal Women Voters could start one. You could start one in your neighborhood. If you were committed to, making sure that, say, everyone on your block or in your neighborhood responds to the census, you could get your people together and start a complete count committee and like get people working on it. I could put you in touch with people from the State Demographer's Office who will give you all the tools you need. I could help you get all the tools you need.
So does the state demographer have a legislative appropriation then to undertake this advocacy for completion of the census?
They do. They are the state's lead agency in making sure that we get a complete count, or as complete as possible count. Okay. And we are supporting their request for even more money. They will probably need more than what they currently have. Yes.
So, Mary Jo McGuire, Redstone Commissioner, hello. And Mindy, thank you for your question, because I ask it all the time about how the city is involved. And it's my understanding that our county manager, when he meets with our city managers, which he does on a regular basis, that they're having these conversations already about getting involved. In fact, I was just speaking at the Moundsview City Council, and I mentioned the census, and they're very aware of all the work that we all need to do together. So thank you for asking the question. It is one that we ask all the time on the county board. We are obviously more than the city of St. Paul and Ramsey County, we have 17 suburban cities, and so we're very concerned with that. And my expectation is that we will involve all of our communities in that every city will be engaged in this effort. So we'll be pushing for that. And because I'm involved in both the state, our state organizations and our national, every county is struggling with this because the federal government is, no surprise, not funding the census to the level that they should or have in the past. Right? The federal government has usually even spent more, and even now when it's even more crucial that we get our numbers straight, they're not thinking this is a priority. In fact, they're not thinking this is a priority at all. So you were kind when you said they're giving some money. I mean, I think the state is giving some money. I'm not sure that the feds are giving very much at all, and I'll get more information on that as we go, but we really are, we feel that we are really going to have to do this, unfortunately, on our own. I mean, believe me, now with the election, we may get some more participation from from our state and our federal government, so we'll be pushing for that really hard with our partners there. But yes, I mean, we are going to need to participate ourselves because we are very concerned about these numbers coming through. So, thank you.
And Commissioner, thank you. I may have misspoken. Were you asking if the state demographer's office has a federal appropriation?
No, I just mentioned that.
Oh, okay.
I didn't specify the source, any money from anybody.
Oh, yeah. So the state demographer's office is getting state
from
money.
anywhere. Yeah.
They're getting state money, and they are requesting more. And we are supporting their request for additional resources because they have some really creative, energetic people in that office with some great ideas for reaching out to people, including new texting programs or apps and swag, and they're contracting with TPT to produce cute little 30, 90-second videos that we'll be able to put on social media. Anyone will be able to post them. Why is the census important? And, how do you fill out the census in different languages and so on. We're also looking at the cost of interpreting, translating materials, census materials. This is a great example of how the local governments, metro governments are collaborating, because rather than each local government, paying for a whole raft of translations in Somali, Hmong, Karen, blah, 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 we're going to divide up the languages and say, okay, Minneapolis will do Somali, St. Paul will do Karen, we'll trade, we'll share, that sort of thing. So we are, trying to be smart and creative in our strategies and how we use our money.
So, but the census cards are sent out by the Census Bureau. So, what language are they planning on using?
So they do provide census materials in a select few other languages that are prominent at a national level, which means not Somali, not Hmong, not Korean, right? Of course, Chinese, of course, Spanish, blah, 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 but not the languages that we really need here, which is why the local governments have to step up and provide those materials.
But we will be providing supportive material, interpretive material.
Right, not the questionnaires.
But not the questionnaires themselves.
Correct, yes, thank you for that clarification. We will be working on supportive materials, instructions, explanations, that sort of thing. We're also going to try to work with local communities to recruit canvassers who speak these languages, who can go door to door and talk to people. We'd also like to encourage those communities, those language communities, to apply for census jobs as enumerators so that those people can go door to door in those neighborhoods where there are a lot of people speaking those languages. Sir, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Yes?
How old do you have to be an operator?
18. And I believe you have to be a citizen, which is another problem.
No, you don't. Oh, maybe that's changed. My husband is not a citizen, and he was,
Really?
yeah.
Oh, that's an open question still this year.
Oh, okay.
I think
Because,
this
I mean,
year-
obviously he went through the whole,
Yeah.
it's quite a late, you know, it's not an intimidating process, but it's a thorough process
It's-
to be hired.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so historically, I believe you did not have to be a citizen, but now the current administration is proposing that you do have to be a citizen.
I suppose, right. Why, yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
If
and-
they're proposing this.
The other thing is you also can't have a felony conviction, which also excludes a lot of people who might otherwise be really great for this job.
No historic felony conviction at all. I
in-
mean, no,
In the past,
in
they
their
claimed
history.
that it was only on a case-by-case basis, but
Mm.
essentially, you know, you weren't gonna get the job.
Hmm.
It may be that this time they're gonna need so many more people and
Yeah.
have trouble recruiting them that
Right.
they'll have to be a little
Right.
more liberal in their judgment. Sorry, just a second.
Oh, right.
Is it related about job, how the job opportunity census offer this year, this time?
So-
How people can apply?
So there is a website, I believe it's censusjobs.gov, but if you Google census jobs,
So you have to go direct to Kansas, or you're gonna go to also?
you can apply online. It's an online application.
What Ramsey County is doing?
So we have the Workforce Solutions Center, which is working with people to train them, you know, in taking an application, filling out the application, and there's a skills test or personality test.
You have no
whatever.
idea what are the job opportunities?
Yes, you can be a
What?
census taker, you can be a census taker, a supervisor. There's an area coordinator job that's currently available right now. So there are a variety of opportunities.
You know they have the partnership especially this time?
The partnership specialist, yes, I believe that is
No, I asked
also.
you because I participated in 2010 census, and I was one of the only Latino partnership specialists in the state.
I would strongly encourage you to apply again, especially with
Well,
your
that's
past
both from
experience. You don't, well,
Huh?
you don't go to Kansas, but, I mean, it's all online, and I don't know where the application goes, but it's all online,
But could he go to a workforce solutions center and they could help him apply there?
yes.
Go to one of our workforce solutions centers and we can give you that. I can give you that, we can give you that address. We'll get that for you. And you can apply there, they'll help you apply. I think actually our libraries might help you do that too, but I think it's better to go to the workforce solutions.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not for me, I'm too old now, but it could be for my son. But at that time, we had a lot of elder people working in the same hall. I remember that.
We need more people this year, this time.
I don't want to see it.
Is there an age limit?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because I applied last time and I missed one on the test.
You were.
I took the test and I missed one on it and I never got a call back. So I don't think it's as easy as you make it.
That's what I'm asking you.
So if
There were
you're,
some people complaining, you know, about that.
they rank your, application in a variety of different ways. One is by how soon you apply. So the sooner you apply, the better your chances. Another one is if you live in an area where they need enumerators because they prefer to have people working in their own neighborhoods. So it could be that you didn't live in an area where there was such a problem with response rates that they needed to hire that many people.
They seem to want people with language skills
Oh, yeah.
that I
Oh, yeah.
didn't have to.
That's possible,
I asking you because 2010 I applied direct, but I applied in 2009. That's when they opened, they had the opportunity. That's
Well,
when you
it's
have to
open
apply,
now.
not for the same year.
Yeah,
You have to apply no later than the beginning of next year.
Yeah,
We start
the
to
earlier
work,
is
we
better.
start to work 1 year prior to the,
Yeah.
we started working in 2009,
Mhm.
before 2010.
No, it's true, they need people
So,
as early as possible.
People have to know about that,
Yeah.
you know, it's gonna be too late.
No, it's true, the
How
earlier
you
you
can
apply,
get
the
out
better.
information, again, you have to go to Census and get the information from there, or just?
No. You can go to the Workforce Solutions Center and they can help you with it. Yeah.
When would the person have to be 18 by?
I'm not sure, but I assume it would be by the time they begin working, but I'm not really sure. So they don't need enumerators until April of 2020. They are also hiring for supervisory positions and other positions, so it really depends on what position they get and when that position begins.
I'm thinking of like high school seniors.
They could do it, yeah. I mean, especially because it would coincide with like spring break to some extent, like April, March, sort of, maybe later in spring break. But yeah, if they could squeeze it in, and you can work as few hours as you want. I mean, I know that there are some people who are concerned about their government benefits. If they work over a certain number of hours, then they lose eligibility for certain benefits. So, you know, you can work like 6 hours a week if that's all you can do, or whatever. Like, they're very flexible. Any other questions?
Right there.
Okay. Couple of other things that Ramsey County has been doing. We did submit a comment to the Board of Commissioners. Submitted a comment to the Department of Commerce opposing the citizenship question during the public comment period. This may make a difference or it may not, but we had to do it anyway, so we did. Yeah, and we're advocating to people in legislative positions. We are organizing, and we are trying to get the community involved. So that's what we're doing. Okay, so I was trying to think. You know, someone's going to ask, you know, what we can do. Here's just a quick and dirty list. You can start or join a complete count committee, right? You can do that. You can become an enumerator or a census taker. You can go online tonight and apply, right? I did it because I thought, you know, I love going around my neighborhood and talking to my neighbors, and this way I'd get paid for it. Why not? You can also help recruit enumerators who live in low response tracts. So if you are somehow involved in an organization where you can reach people who live in, say, you know, high immigrant population neighborhoods, neighborhoods that have a lot of people of color or low income households, if there's some way that you can like reach those communities and try to put out the word that these jobs are out there and recruit people who are needed, that would be helpful as well. Another issue is apartments, also known as multi-unit housing in government speak, right? Those places are also consistently undercounted because it can be difficult for an enumerator to get in the building, right? So if you have a huge apartment building with hundreds of units and maybe only 60% of people responded on their own and an enumerator can't get in, we're never going to be able to raise that response rate. There is currently a law, a Minnesota statute that says that political candidates must be allowed access into apartment buildings. There's an effort coming from the state demographer's office to amend this statute to include census takers. So, you know, you could write to your legislator and say, you know, hey, this is important. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can ask for. You could support legislative efforts to ensure that the Census Bureau is fully funded, you know, writing to your congressperson. You could ask other organizations that you're involved in what they are doing. You know, start putting out the word that this is this is important, this is urgent, it's, 2020 isn't that far away, we need to start thinking about the census. Any networks you have, any other organizations that you're involved with, ask them, what are you doing about the census? And tell your friends, start talking about it with people you know. I think that's, just getting the word out and getting the buzz going is the crucial first step.
Just a comment too, I don't know if this has changed or if this was completely typical, but when my husband was an enumerator, he always partnered with somebody. So you're not going out on your own into the big scary world. I mean, you split up, you don't go door to door as a team, but you're canvassing a block, or whatever together as a team, and you have a buddy, you have a partner.
Yeah.
Typically, that's what he had anyway.
Right, yeah, no, that's good. Any other questions?
So what do you do to count people who have disabilities? Is it legal for social workers and such to help with those clients?
That's a good question. I know that it is illegal for a census taker to tell people how to respond to the questionnaire. But I'm sure that there must be cases in which a social worker or a home health care person is present and helping them with it.
Or I didn't even mean that they had to be present, but just that they helped make sure they participated. For instance, when Section 8 housing opens up, those short windows, they do a really good job of making sure everybody that qualifies applies.
Yeah.
So I wondered if they could play a similar role in census, since those people are the ones that would be getting the SNAP and the MA and so forth.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's also something that we in Ramsey County are thinking about. What we could do, especially in in the building where our social services are administered. It could be as simple as just having pamphlets, or brochures, flyers that go out to people. A little reminder, every time they talk to someone, every time a social worker talks to someone, they can say, and don't forget to answer the census. We're trying to think of creative ways to work that into our operations.
I'm thinking that if they could relay the information that the money is tied to that, I think that would provide more urgency.
And it does too. There have been some researchers who have already started doing surveys to test messaging, like what kinds of messaging are people most responsive to. And one is that government programs that you may depend on are dependent on census data. The funding that you may depend on in your life, or that your friends or family may depend on, is dependent on the census. And that messaging seems to resonate with a lot of people.
Or the churches, not just that you get it, but that you want others to get it. I think it's even more of a powerful message.
Yeah.
Because that message, if you get it, then the ones who don't get it would say, well then, why should I mean, I think it's better to be thinking of others instead of yourself when you're applying for money.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, even if if it does work to appeal to people's self-interest, then fine.
Well, targeted to them.
But yeah, you also want to, think more broadly and reach out to, as you mentioned, faith communities and nonprofit organizations, and just anyone who works with a diverse group of people.
Absolutely. Some people are against welfare funding, of course.
Well,
Sorry,
one more question.
Do private enterprises like utility companies or the water utility ever participate, to insert in bills?
Yes, that's another idea that we've been sort of floating, is putting inserts into people's Excel bills or whatever. Yeah, and that might be really effective too. Yeah. So Yeah, the property tax insert is another one that we thought about, but that goes out after the census is, so that wouldn't work so much. But yeah, we're definitely looking for, you know, creative ways to get the message out there.
Another possibility is the night to unite. Those events, which are very neighborhood, of course, in our neighborhoods, but I can see issues in that we happen to live on a very, 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 very diverse street, and it's difficult, 62 homes, but very difficult to get everyone there simply because for about 5 minutes, the sheriff's car shows up. You know, and they're there, very bringing treats and things like that. That still turns off a number of people on our street. So that's a really challenging thing to do, but that night to unite might be a possibility.
Yeah.
Call something different head of county.
We're definitely interested in sort of inserting ourselves into any sort of public community festivals, celebrations, events, like anything, Rondo Days, whatever, to get people to, you know, maybe we would have tables with canvassers who have iPads, because now there's the online response option, so you could, like, you know, go up to people with an iPad and say, hey, have you filled out the census yet? You haven't? Oh, well, let's do it now. I mean, there are lots of options that the online response option gives us that we didn't have before.
If there are any other questions pop up, I'm sure Jolie will be more than welcome to answering them after. But right now, I'd like to really give her a round of applause for an incredible